The galaxy burns. The heretic falls. And the Emperor protects. Welcome, Imperial citizens, to The Emperor Protects. My name is Doug, and I host the channel 2 Plus Tough. Along with me is my co-host, Dan, from Cubic Shenanigans. How you doing, man?
Doing great, my friend.
Yeah, and we're here to read Horus Heresy books so you don't have to. And today we are featuring The Descent of Angels by Mitchell Scanlon, I believe is how it's pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
And this has to do everything with the Dark Angels, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be getting into that. So before we do, I just want to say, Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot and say that we've gotten a lot of positive feedback, specifically from the coverage of the World Eaters, and so I'm hoping to bring some of that forward.
Great.
And people were real stoked about that book, and so hopefully this is another one of those ones where people are like, I hear negative things. Do I want to read it? Spoiler alert, meh. That's going to be maybe.
Yes.
And so we're going to jump into that story. Do you have any kind of preface information you want to drop on folks before we?
Well, I think to your point, this is different, in a way, because it really focuses on one character.
Yes.
And I think most heresy books, they have a cast of characters. This one does too. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it really focuses on a single individual throughout the story, more than it does in most heresy books I can think of. And so that's really interesting. The other piece is just the origin story of the Dark Angels. It's basically medieval knights meets the Imperium, And so chaos ensues literally after that.
In the grim darkness of the future, we all went to medieval times and had Pepsi and note forks. Yes.
but I want to say that I think it's interesting because when you read the story, it really makes it clear why, the people who were there, especially the guys who were part of the order that we're going to talk about, once everything changed and they met the Space Marines, the Dark Angel Space Marines and stuff that came to Caliban, that you can understand and really sympathize for how they felt about what the Imperium did to their planet. And so you can understand why there's this resentment, and you can understand why there's this kind of a schism almost. It may be unspoken, but it's there. And I think that's interesting.
It is. I will say, so part of how we structured this for you guys on the other end of Radioland, Dan knows everything. Okay, he's my lore keeper for Horus Heresy stuff. He's gonna argue it, but whatever. I have the microphone and the final editing skills. So Dan is like my info dump of like, I'm reading these books as a refresher for myself, but I haven't read this one before. And I don't really know much about the Dark Angel story, like from the Black Library books.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because I do think this book improves the more you know about the overall story. This is more of like a how we got there than what we are type book, if that makes sense.
I think that makes perfect sense. Yes.
Yeah, because like I was comparing it to the origin story of, say, the World Eaters. Okay, another one, or the White Scars, whatever one you want to pick. But like,
sure,
that one, the structure of the book was you see them in action as Space Marines, and you ask, why are they different? And then you have a whole book that's like, this is why Angron is so messed up, and he's got some good points and he's got some bad ones. Take him or leave him. But this book is more like, here's a vibe, and I don't feel like the vibe continues in Dark Angels, but I don't feel like there was as many direct A to B points with the background and the schism. Like, unless you already know it's coming, it's not on the nose.
Right.
So I felt it was a little bit weak-fisted, but I understand that if you have all the context, this probably lines up a lot of things.
Yeah.
That was my thought. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. And I think one of the things that I enjoy about this book is it is different in the way you talked about.
Absolutely.
Is that it's kind of standalone, but it is an origin story. And I think that the way that Mitch Scanlon ends the story, it's really great in terms of setting up for a sequel.
Gotcha. Okay,
You
yeah,
really,
you pass
you
the
know,
baton.
and once we know what happens, at that point you're going, oh yeah, this made perfect sense. We understand completely
Hmm.
why this happened and what was going on and who these people were. So
Gotcha.
yeah, so good stuff, man.
Okay.
So why don't we get started with kind of a brief history of the home planet of Caliban, which
Yes.
is where the story is, most of the story. So it exists really much as it has for thousands of years. There are knightly orders that protect the common people. They fight the beasts, and these beasts are not like lions, tigers, and bears. These
Right.
are like huge, like mythical beasts that they're fighting in these
Yeah.
seemingly endless forests. The
All
planet of
the
Caliban is just covered
Go
with
to
forests.
Games
And
Workshop, look up the Slaves to Darkness, any
yes,
monsters from that range, the
yes,
Chimera, the the cockatrice, all of it. It's all terrible.
yeah, absolutely. And it's all there. Uh, so it's interesting that um, that's all been there in that way, and it works that way for a very long time.
Yeah.
And it has worked for everybody, and it's okay. Eventually, what happens though is that uh, Lionel Johnson, who is one of the Primarchs, one of the 18 sons,
Hmm.
he's discovered by the leader of this one knightly order, and there's several on the planet called the Order, and his name is Sar Luther. And Luther is not a space marine or anything, but he is just massive, and he's powerful, and he's a great leader. He discovers Lionel Johnson basically as a savage child in the woods who's been surviving all this stuff, which is
Yes.
incredible. And so uh, he does that, and then uh, as Johnson grows into the Primarch that he's going to be
Hmm.
eventually, um, he has this vision. He says, "I want Caliban to be a peaceful planet. I want it to be unified." And he pitches this thing where they want to lead a crusade to destroy all the great beasts.
Yes.
And the strange part of that is there's quite a bit of dissent among the other knightly orders,
Hmm.
and even among some people in the order going, well, wait a minute, if we kill all the beasts, what then, right? Because
Yep.
that's everything. But as this is happening, the Imperium ends up showing up, and all of a sudden you've got a bunch of new concerns. You have a new destiny for the lion and his sons,
Yep.
and yeah, that's where the sons of Caliban have to kind of decide if they're going to follow him to the stars. That's kind of the summary here, I think.
Absolutely. No, that's and what's funny is I feel like that's the perfect snapshot of this book because that's kind of where it ends of like, who are we in this new whatever? I mean,
Mhm.
it's not really well defined, I don't feel at the end for purpose, like on purpose, in a
Right.
good way. That's a struggle that they all have for sure.
Yeah, and one quick note, Doug, for the listeners is
Yeah.
you're going to hear some rank uh, nomenclature, and just wanted to run that through for people. So the order is the preeminent knight order on the planet, and what happens is when you first pass your pretty grueling, actually, initiation uh, rite,
Hmm.
then you are a novice. And once you have achieved enough, you become a supplicant. And then once you have been in training for several years and you've achieved something great, you become a knight. So that's kind of the order of the ranking. Pretty simple, really.
Yep.
Um,
No,
but
and it matters because we meet him, our main character Zahariel, as a novice, and then follow
yeah,
him to knighthood. So it's a progression for him as a character for sure.
exactly.
Hmm.
So I guess let's get started with the story. So when the story begins, we're meeting a young knight, and at this time in the story, he's a supplicant. His name is Zahariel, and as we said earlier, this is his story. He's the
Hmm.
main character, and he's been brought before his teacher, Master Rymiel, and they're talking about the significance of this spiral that's been inscribed into the floor. And it was kind of interesting way to start it out with this character,
Yeah.
because the spiral ends up representing all kinds of things. It represents martial prowess, renewal, history repeating itself, and then he goes, Well, just so you know, I'm going to let you know that by this time tomorrow, you will have died and been reborn. Zahariel's like, what? I'm going to have died and been reborn.
News to
Okay.
me.
Yeah, right. That's how it starts for him. And so what he is he goes to an interview. And it's interesting that, of course, one of the things you get the vibe of is how secretive the order is.
Yes. Yep.
Like they take them down this curving dark staircase that goes around, and there's sconces on the walls, and there's hoods. You can't see anybody's face, you know. So
it made me think of the Masons, honestly. They have doors with no handles that like you only open from the inside.
Yes, exactly. And so this next scene is an interview that he's doing before he becomes a supplicant. So this is his first promotion, his first significant promotion. So he's in a dark room, and he can't see he hears three voices, so he knows that there are three knights who are questioning him. And he believes that one of them is Lord Cypher, who, for everyone, it is not a name, it is a title. Yes. And Lord Cypher, no one ever knows who he is. He is just picked from among the ranks of the knights. And when one Lord Cypher decides that he needs to go out, he gets old enough and he goes out for his final quest, they pick a new Lord Cypher. And it's just part of their ritual.
Yep. And on that note, he's not like a massive player in this story, the position of Cypher, but I will say they do point out really quickly that his role is more ceremonial rather than like authoritative. But the idea behind him is you keep the moral direction and the tradition of the order. Like, so he's just kind of like an ancillary thing, but he has a lot of input, and so it's a very weighty figure.
And what's interesting is the kind of transition or the morphing of Cypher into a much more significant character in the 40K and the Dark Angels.
Absolutely.
I mean, Cypher does some very, very crucial things in the story and in the lore in 40K. Mm-hmm. And he actually becomes something very different than what we're seeing in this book. So you got the three interviews. One of them is very hostile, actually. He's asking him really challenging questions. He's insulting him and saying,
I'm not going to take in this dirt orphan. And the kid's like, oh, man, dude.
and then there's two more interviews, but the third one's very circumspect. Yeah. And he has very meaningful questions, just totally different than the other one. And in the end, he's welcomed into the order by all three. And it turns out he is absolutely shocked that not only is it Lord Cypher, but it's Sar Luther and it's Lionel Johnson. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that Sar Luther was the one who was being the jerk.
Yes.
Just because Luther, he's got such a cool personality, I think. Like, he can do this kind of stuff where he can be really mean and kind of bullying. On the other hand, there's a couple of scenes in the story where he just acts so sophomoric. Like, he just acts like a college kid and he does some prank on somebody.
Yep.
And I think Zahariel saw him do something and he was laughing. And he's like, well, how would somebody of your stature do something like that? He goes, we have to laugh. We still brothers, but anyway, that was a really interesting conversation that was happening. And so now Zahariel is officially a supplicant. And the next thing we see is Zahariel has a cousin named Nemiel. And they're like twins almost. They're very, very close. And they've been very close since childhood. Mm-hmm. And the relationship really plays a crucial role for both of them. So I think the nuanced elements of it are important. And one of those is that there's this constant niggling that Nemiel really feels a lot of jealousy towards Zahariel's accomplishments.
Yes.
Just constant. And he's always kind of digging in sometimes to give Zahariel a hard time. And Zahariel, to his credit, he's so patient. Like he doesn't ever take it personally. He's just like, yeah, this is who Nemiel is, and it's a strong foreshadowing of how their relationship will in later stories become very destructive.
Yes.
And one of the things
it sets up the perfect brother versus brother. I mean, it's foreshadowing,
which is what the Heresy is all about, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And then one of the other central characters here is one of the knights of the order called, his name is Amatus. And he gives this speech when all these young novices become supplicants.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a hero among, especially Zahariel, considers him and all his accomplishments just amazing. He's like a folk hero.
Yeah.
Among the order, and especially among the supplicants. So one of the things I thought was really interesting was you flash back, and Zahariel has this nightmare, and it's a recurring nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And this really explains a lot here, in that it was the first trial that they had to overcome to become a novice and actually be accepted into the order. And it was held at their main fortress monastery. It's called Alderuk. And it seems like it's a simple thing, but let's remember, first of all, it was happening in the winter.
Yep.
And what it was, he and his cousin and 200 other people had to stand in place for 24 hours. And you're like, wow, okay, that's not so bad. Well, it's snowing. And like, it comes up to like their knees, right? And they took their boots, they took almost all their clothes, their jackets and everything. So basically you're standing there in a shirt and pants and socks.
Real men die of exposure. Yeah.
It's snowing. Yeah, exactly. And the guards come out, and he did such a great job in the book, Doug, of the guards would come out and say, get right in somebody's face and say, you are a loser. You are never going to make it, blah, blah, blah. And then another guy would come over to another guy and go, hey, you don't even need to do this. I'm just telling you, the word inside of Alderuk is that you are already qualified. You don't have to do this. Yep. So why don't you follow me and let's get you set up. And this kid does it. He follows him and he just sees a Harlan and then he'll go, oh my God. So like the first step he takes, all the guards are just laughing their butts off. And he goes, what? He goes, you just failed. Nobody said anything. You're a loser.
Yep.
And they take him out into the woods to get eaten. Like, oh my gosh. So to show how grueling this was, out of the 200 that started, only a dozen finished. That's insane. And you know what's even more insane, Doug?
What's that?
Is Zahariel and Nemiel, when this was happening, were 7 years old.
Yep. Smoking cigarettes, shaving with a knife.
Oh my God. 7! When I read that, it was like, oh my God.
You got a 7-year-old to stand in place for 24 hours? Interesting.
These are just...
These science fiction writers, huh?
You're right, exactly. Because you think about, like most people who join the Space Marines or something, they're usually a little older. They're usually in their late teens, early 20s, that kind of thing. But it was just nuts. Anyway, so I think that's important, though, to bring that up and talk about, because it does give you an idea of and some context for when this was happening in their lives and stuff. Yes, and
very young.
Zahariel does mention in his retelling that Nemiel is probably the reason he actually passed, because there were times when he just wanted to move and he didn't, but he said it was because it's nothing that Nemiel said. It's that I just knew he was there and I didn't want to move. Yep. So, okay. So the next part of the story, Zahariel and his cousin, they trained for years and years and years, probably 7 or 8 years. And they've been elevated to the rank of supplicant, and now they're 15 years old. Oh my gosh, 15. Yep. So mature, right? And while the boys are training over all this time, the Knights of the Order.
I do want to
Oh,
pause here. So this, I
yeah,
joke, but this is a death world, and so they're probably like having their midlife crisis at the age of 15. Like that's kind of the idea that we get.
it's true. Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yes,
Oh my
go
gosh,
on.
it's just, but it makes you. To me, it gives me so much more respect for these guys
Yes.
as a group. You know, the Order and the Dark Angels and stuff. That this is what they had to do. So the Knights of the Order, on Johnson's grand plan, they've been hunting down the great beasts of Caliban because they want to hunt them down to extinction. Although the lion reveals to Zahariel, because they kind of have this private conversation, that the hunt's almost at the end, and the only remaining stronghold for the beast is in the North Wilds, and we'll talk why that's important. And eventually Zahariel and several other of the supplicants are chosen to accompany Brother Amadis, which is Zahariel's hero, on a hunt, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Like, oh my gosh, their first hunt. Now, weapon-wise, what do we have here? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So the weapon, it's very interesting the way they set the scene. So all the Primarchs are like on their own, barring Angron, who had some work done, but they're all geniuses. Like, and when the lion became as a feral child, he quickly figured out language and science, whatever. And he's been like incrementally upping their arms for a long time. Like not a long time. He hasn't been there for forever, but a while. And so we have sort of a, I'm going to have everyone go open the Games Workshop tab, go to the Cities of Sigmar. We're going to look and compare these to some knights. But you think about knights and, you know, medieval times, that kind of stuff, but they're in crude power armor. Like think power armor, both like pulleys and weights instead of like self-contained power sources. It all sounds very like Da Vinci-esque. You know, you have like land ships and it's a tank or something like that. There's none of that in there, but it's that same idea of like weird steampunk versions of things that exist. They have pistols. They have, you know, what is it? Ballistics, armor. I don't know. Anything else stand out to you?
Well, they actually end up with a rudimentary form of chainsword.
Yes, that's right. I forgot about that.
Very rudimentary. It is nothing like the carry in 40K, but it's something. So yeah, you're right. It's steampunk. I think is a great description.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not talking bolt pistols here. You know?
No. It's all small arms.
It's not that, right? And so they went on this scouting mission, and Zahariel's squad comes over attacked by one of the great beasts, and they start taking casualties. Mm-hmm. Well, it gets to a point where Zahariel ends up risking his own life to keep the beast distracted. And while he does that, Amadis comes over and kills the beast. But the fact that Zahariel, you know, was ready to sacrifice himself for his friends.
Yeah.
When they get back, Amadis makes sure that everybody knows that, yeah, I killed him, but this would have ended very differently if Zahariel hadn't distracted the beast and he saved all his friends, you know. Absolutely. So now he's getting some recognition in those upper echelons, Luther and Lion and all those kind of things. And of course, Amadis starts mentoring Zahariel.
Yeah.
And Nebiel's like, jealous. It's just the word.
It was always going to happen. One of them's going to get some kind of accolade, and the other one's not. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was always a friendly rivalry before, but it just turns kind of nasty. Even though they're still close, it's much more serious now when they compete against each other.
For sure.
And Nemiel definitely is. Yeah. So anyway, not a happy camper. What about this Knights of Lupus thing? Why don't you talk to us a little bit about how that ties in?
So when Lionel Johnson announced his crusade, lowercase c crusade, to get rid of the beasts, essentially there was some dissent, as you mentioned, and part of it was these people who think that the beasts are a part of Caliban's history, its identity, its nature. It also separates knights who can fight beasts from the rabble, so it's like their knightly identity. One of those houses, or those orders rather, that was really opposed to this crusade was known as the Knights of Lupus. And they have kind of their hold to the far north where it gets cold and forest is really dense. And they send a representative, and basically what happens is Lion's Crusade is going around the planet, and it kind of all converges at the doorstep of the Knights of Lupus. He wants to get in, and he wants to kill the beasts. And the Knights of Lupus are like, you don't have any right to trespass on our land. Like, beasts or not. Like, it doesn't matter. And so scouts were sent in to go find the beast's lair, and they were slain. So, like, Lion's already got people dying as a result of trying to probe into territory. Their leader, Lord Sartana, demands that the North Wilds basically become a sanctuary for the beasts. Of like, hey, we shouldn't wipe them all away. We got to keep a couple for our heritage. You got to have a zoo.
Yeah.
And basically they come to heads where essentially they declare war upon one another. So now it's devolved from the knightly orders working to preserve, and now they've turned on each other, which was a big moment. I mean, because you go from a almost entirely united mankind on Caliban to small scale civil war.
Yes.
And so when this is all going on, during the confrontation, it's revealed that Amadis's birth town of Endriago is being preyed upon by a great beast, and Amadis declares a quest to destroy it.
Yep.
There's a night war going on against Lupus, and what is it here? As Zahariel and his fellow supplicants gather for a meal, the discussion becomes heated, and Zahariel suggests that Lord Sartana had been speaking with truth, meaning, maybe we actually are violating some kind of pact or something. Like, what? He'd have the whole discussion amongst the supplicants of like, what if we're the baddies, right?
Yeah.
and they have to have this real discussion. But yeah, essentially at the end of that kind of scene, 5 months after confronting the beast, Armadis returns to the fortress that they're at, mortally wounded, gives Zahariel his huge pistol, which is just like a mega gun for a child to have, and reveals that the beast of Endriago, as it's known, is a rare and deadly Calibanite lion, before he dies of his own wounds. And this is important because the only other person to have ever defeated a Calibanite lion is Lionel Johnson himself. And so now we know that there is, like, as the beasts are going away and the glory that you can achieve and is idolized by all these knights for killing them means that opportunity is going away too. So right in the middle of all this going away, the most valuable of all monsters shows up, and everybody wants that. That's an honor.
Absolutely.
And basically, while he's holding his mentor dying, Zahariel takes the gun and declares a quest against the beast, which everyone immediately was like, what are you doing? Like, this is a terrible idea. You're going to get eaten alive, little boy.
You're 15. You're 15, dude.
Well, as he's getting up, the guy next to him's like, don't say it. Don't you dare say it, because once you declare a quest, you can't back out of it. It's not like a light verb. It's a binding agreement. So everyone's like, shut up.
Yeah.
But he declares it, heads out. Everyone gives him, like, he has a great party, realizes halfway through everyone's basically like, this is like a funerary party where everyone's assuming he's gonna die.
Yes.
He's like, oh, this is not fun anymore.
Bad choice, Bubba.
But yeah, he essentially starts going into the North Wilds to go hunt this beast here.
Yeah, and one of the things I thought was interesting is this is the real. I mean, if you read any, I think people listen, they know chaos is what it is.
Right.
If they listen to the show, and so when you get this feeling now that the author is starting to drip and drab some chaos stuff, intimations of chaos, because as he goes into the area where the beast of Andriago is, the woodlands almost seem diseased and just weird. They're not healthy, even though it's the forests were thick and they were okay. These are trees that are just not right. And he kind of has this weird feeling, a feeling that there's kind of a malign presence underneath the surface of the earth. And so this is the first intimation that there's something not right with Caliban. And as he continues, he encounters these little creatures that you could, I think the best comparison is the Jawas from the first Star Wars.
Yes, they are. Yep.
That's what I picture. They had these little short people, 2-3 feet tall. They have hoods that you can't see their faces, and they kind of just shuffle around everywhere. So in the story, they become the Watchers in the Dark. That's what they end up being called. And they tell Zahariel that the taint that is responsible for the beast. So here we go. When you say taint equals chaos. You just know that's where these beasts are coming from. That the same taint is present in Zahariel. And he's just going, what?
Right.
Like, what does that even mean? Right. He has no concept of what they're talking about.
Also, he's just meandering through the woods looking for a monster, and he starts getting roasted by Jawas. Like, there's no reason for this. They're just all the things that are wrong with this world. It's in this kid too, and you're like, ugh, why?
Oh, go away, little dudes! And then they start arguing whether or not to kill him because he has this taint, and he finally agrees to swear to them to oppose this malign force, whatever it is. And when he agrees that if he sees this kind of, malign force in the great beast, whatever it is, he will fight it. And they're like, okay, cool, you can go now.
Fine. And
of course they say, stay out of the area because it corrupts those who go within it. Corruption equals chaos. So there we go. We're in that. We have that piece now. We've been pushed in that direction. Mm-hmm. So I think
pause here as we leave the Watchers in the Dark.
Yeah,
I have no idea. I had never had any idea what they were. Looking at the Dark Angels model range, because that's where we make the Jawas joke, because that's what they look like. Yeah. Jawas in green robes, and so it's like for this to be their only representation in this book, I was very perplexed because they show up. Zahariel basically walks into their home. They're sort of like a myth on Caliban, and he doesn't know what to make of them, and neither did I at the end of this. I was like, okay. He just got roasted by Oompa Loompas, and now he's just kind of meandering away.
Exactly.
But I'm sure it makes more sense later on.
Well, and it does because, again, in the next book, there's some, and there's also quite a bit of it in the 40K lore. And they're on the base, on Johnson's base in 40K now. And now you get to see them. And I think there was one model that used to be in the line, Doug, where there was a Watcher holding somebody's helmet.
Yes, I think that's still in there. Maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a good point. So I think the most important to me when you read through this encounter is the implication that the Watchers make that there's a much larger diaspora of humanity in the galaxy.
Yes.
Because, when the Lion and Zahariel were standing and having their short conversation, the Lion is going, I wonder if there are any people out there, because nobody's ever been out in space from Caliban. They've never had any contact from anybody. And so now they say this, and that puts another thing in Zahariel's head, like, whoa, maybe there's more.
Yeah. And
that whole concept is very disturbing, I think, for him. Mm-hmm. So he finally ends up encountering the beast of Andriago.
Yep.
And I thought the description of the combat was so good. You could have just made this a short thing. It was back and forth. And, here he is with his baby chainsaw and his old like
his
6-shooter from
BFG,
the Wild West, right? Trying to kill this beast that's like as big as a truck. And at one point, the beast charges. It gets really close, and Zahariel can feel that corruption now. It's palpable to him. Mm-hmm. He detects it, as it were. And then he's finally pinned. He's overpowered. This thing is right over his face, and suddenly this desperation seems to unleash some kind of a power within him. And we all know it as psychic powers, because that's what it is. It turns out he is a latent psyker at this point. And this power allows him to see through the skin of the beast, and literally he can push his pistol in through the beast's flesh, and he pushes it right up against the heart, pulls the trigger, and just boom, it just blows up the heart. The beast explodes, and it is dead. Wow. So that was kind of a neat, to me, a reveal of a thing that's going to be part of Zahariel's future.
Absolutely. Yeah. He
and
just
again,
killed the last Calibanite lion.
Yeah. Oh, that is the other big piece here. The only other person, as you pointed out, was Johnson, who had done that. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, he doesn't want to tell anybody about this, because think again of medieval Europe and witches getting burned and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
There's still that going on here on Caliban. That if you have some kind of weird power like that, chances are, yeah.
Well, and also at this point, he doesn't know that it came from him. It just happened. He was pinned against a wall, everything slowed down and went invisible, and then he was just kind of feeling out the scenario and then realized I could shoot the thing.
Yes,
but like
exactly.
he doesn't know if it was the Watchers who we left or if it was the monster. Like, it was just a thing. And even when he tells Lionel Johnson about it, he's like, "You're going to have to tell me sometime how you managed to kill that lion, okay?" Like, he very playfully, like, something happened. He knows.
And Zahariel's like, "I don't know. It just happened, right?" So, because, and you can just tell he's still furious about this thing killing his mentor.
Absolutely.
And so he beheads it. He takes the head back
dude.
to Alderuk. And again, he's like 15 years old.
Yeah, spinster.
Insane.
Absolutely.
So it's been a month since he killed the beast, and he gets back because he stops in a village that's close by. You know, he has to recover and do all those things. And he ends up taking this thing back. And he's raised to knighthood in honor of this achievement. So now he was a full-fledged knight. It's also revealed that Johnson's going to be the Grand Master of the Order, which is cool. Nemiel has also achieved knighthood, which is cool. And right after these things are happening, Lord Cypher goes on his final quest. The new Cypher is chosen, who his identity is a mystery, as we talked about. Those things have all happened. So now we get back to what you talked about with the Knights of Lupus. Why don't you kind of circle around and get us up to date with what's going on with those guys?
Yeah. So, sorry about that. In the distance of about a chapter, we went from slaying manticores in the woods to proto World War I. Okay, I don't know how, but the scene opens up with their war against the Knights of Lupus, and like Zahariel goes, like, again, like I said, from killing this beast, he rolls up in his power armor. He's got his cool gun, a better sword now, and they're like, "Get in the trench, your boys are about to attack." And they literally do. They have trench warfare with their like steampunk power armor and revolver pistols, and it's crazy. I mean, it was a cool fight, and I wanted a whole book like in this, but it felt very jarring a little bit, just compared to the last scene.
Agreed.
But essentially, he is now just immediately put into his old unit, which is now making the push towards the center of there's the Knights of Lupus, rather. And there's a great battle scene. I think I haven't known many books by him, but I do think Mitchell Scanlon is a fantastic action scene writer.
Yes,
because these are very evocative, and I wanted more every time I read an action sequence, and this is full of them.
Yes.
But essentially, the battle against the Knights of Lupus culminates when they bust inside the main, I guess, corridor of the fortress, and they realize that the Knights of Lupus are not just defending their ground that happens to have beasts on it; they're harboring them, like they're capturing them, almost like it was a time capsule or something. And so imagine fighting all the way to the doorstep of a fortress, and you kick in the door, and it's just like every monster from Monsters Inc. in there ready to kill you. Like everyone just turns at the same time to look at you is basically what happened to Lionel Johnson. And they have this whole scene where they just start slaughtering. I mean, it's just wholesale. I don't know. I guess everybody was elevated to knighthood that day.
Yeah. Yep.
But Zahariel and Nemiel are slaying beasts. A final one, larger than any others, blocks their advance because they're trying to get to I forgot his name by now, but like the Sartana, that's what it was.
Sartana, yep.
Leader of the Knights of Lupus. They break into the final keep, and he basically, Zartana's last words is very prophetic, and he warns them that the Lion's Crusade is going to destroy Caliban. By destroying all the monsters means the knights are going to have no one to fight but themselves. And he's looking around. I mean, they're standing in the proof of that fact.
Yeah.
And he essentially takes his own life before he's allowed to be killed. And with that, the Knights of Lupus are defeated and wiped out. But I like that scene because it really conjured a lot of the sentiment from the very first Horus Heresy books that we covered, that original 3-part series with Loken, where you ask the question, what do warriors do when there's no more war? And it's a thing that's on all of their minds. And this crusade, lowercase c, is just kind of it's their version of the Grand Crusade that they're about to enter into, but they ask the same questions, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Sometime later on, the Lion leads an honor guard, including Luther and Zahariel, on a hunt for the last great beast. And they reach a clearing where the Lion has dreamt of the stars coming to Earth and witnessed the Imperium's first arrival on Caliban. And basically, it's the advance team, the scouting party for the First Legion. Adeptus Astartes are jumping down with jetpacks, and this is when they start using the Calibanite term to describe these warriors from their own myths and legends. Call them the Dark Angels. And so,
yep, there is. That's the origin.
Yep, and a lot of these things, it's kind of hard to without going into detail about the side stories, but the dialogue in this book drops a lot of little like presents for us. I guess Easter eggs would be the term, of like the mythologies of Caliban and how those names kind of fit in later on, like how Cypher fits into the order, how Dark Angels, even the name itself is a reference to their lore, I guess. On Caliban, I don't know. It's interesting stuff. But yes, now all of a sudden the Imperium is here.
Yeah, boy, and are they here?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, radical changes now. First of all, we have real Astartes that are there, and the Imperium, when it colonizes a planet, just kind of does whatever the heck it wants. First of all, the knights now are competing to become Astartes. You have masses of the common people who are being recruited for the Imperial Guard.
Yep.
That's never happened before.
Nope.
The common people were just chilling fields and taking care of their families and doing
working
this
and
stuff.
dying. Yep.
Yeah, and now mountainsides have been like just dug out and scarred because of mines, and the forests are just getting all torn down and leveled to make room for other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this huge technological revolution that sweeps across the planet. And all this is happening while they've heard that the Emperor is going to come to Caliban. And it's like, oh, wow, the Emperor. There is a guy like that. Wow. And I thought one of the interesting, I put it in the notes because it demonstrates, again, Zahariel, and you said it earlier, isn't really aware yet of what he has, right? So there's a competition going on for becoming an Astartes, and of course the competition at this point is between Zahariel and Nemiel, and it's a race. Well, the Zahariel he's just finding this inner strength, and he is just running like nothing's wrong. Like his heart isn't even sped up. He's just going and going, and finally he comes up and he's about to lap Nemiel, and he goes, I don't know, should I really do? Shoom, he does it. It's like. Yep. Why did he even ask? And of course, Nemiel is furious, right? And as the race is over, one of the Astartes starts to talk to Zahariel and ask him how he won. What did you do?
Yeah.
And Zahariel's like, I think I reached down. I have this really deep reserve of inner energy, and I just reached down for that. And the guy who's asking him is actually Brother Librarian Israfel. And he has detected that Zahariel is a psyker.
Mm-hmm.
And so he kind of starts explaining, and he explains to him that he has something called the terror sight, which is what he had when he fought the beast, where he can slow down time and he can kind of see what's going on. And he said it's very rare, but he explained that's what he did. And then Israfel tells Zahariel the history of Terra, the Emperor, the Age of Strife. There's a lot of exposition that goes on here. Maybe not for those of us who have read the Heresy, but in terms of catching Zahariel up so he understands what the big picture is. And I thought that was actually really good.
It was, because this whole thing is about like the story of knighthood and like everyone's individual stories. But I appreciated Israfel taking a second to be like, this is how you fit into the greater story, right? Like, you're Zahariel, the Uber Knight here, but then if you zoom out even just a little bit, like, nah, bro, like we got a lot going on.
Right. And I think it was critical that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then this next part, it's kind of cool, actually. So Nemiel and Zahariel are just kind of chatting about all the changes.
Oh, I love this part, yeah.
To Caliban. And at this point, they're aspirants to become Space Marines. And, you know, we talked about how the Earth has been scarred and the land has been cleared and everything else. And Zahariel tells Nemiel of a conversation he had with brother Israfel, learning that the Astartes don't believe in gods and demons and things like that. It's too much. But Nemiel kind of circles back and goes, well, you know what? I'm really concerned about the changes that are happening here. I mean, that's great. I'm glad what you're telling me, but I'm very concerned about it. And he actually takes, I thought this was like, why would you take Zahariel when you really don't know how he feels to this thing? He takes him to a secret meeting of men who see the colonization as an invasion.
Yes.
And they're actually plotting to assassinate the emperor. Oh, that's going to turn out well.
No way this could go wrong.
Right? So Zahariel basically threatens to expose them if they act. And Nemiel's like, oh, calm down. They're not going to do this. They're just frustrated. They're just venting. And I wanted you to be part of it because you're my brother. Okay? And Zahariel's going, man, it was almost like that just didn't happen.
Yeah.
I don't believe that Nemiel took me to that thing. And of course, when the emperor arrives on Caliban, as part of the ceremonial procession that's going on, Zahariel is there, and he recognizes one of the conspirators. They had hoods on, but he could kind of see the shadows and everything, and he recognizes one of them. He breaks away, even though he knows it's probably going to be, you know, a break with protocol and all that. And he tries to apprehend the man, but they end up both being captured by the Astartes.
Yes.
And when he is captured, there are these little canisters of stuff. Like, you know that this was a bomb or something very, very bad that was going to happen here. And they interrogate both Zahariel and this other guy. And Zahariel, he proves his innocence, obviously, because they can read his mind and they know what's what.
Yep.
And what's interesting, as some of the other Space Marines besides Israfel are really, they're kind of roughing him up. Like, you're a traitor, you're going to die. And Israfel goes like, back off, boys, back off. And then the Emperor shows up and he thanks Zahariel personally.
Yeah, dude.
So everybody else is like, okay, you're cool.
You got a fist bump from Big E. That's awesome. Oh, and what I love is Raphael is pretty bold-faced, where it's just like, this guy's going to be a part of the Librarian. He's special to me, so you're not going to just diss him.
Exactly.
Like, I want him.
With friends like that, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
And then the Lion gives this big speech, you know, in front of all of the First Legion now. and the candidates who have passed the trials, which are Zahariel and Nemiel. And Luther is the one who makes the announcement that the Legion is going to be called the Dark Angels. Since you mentioned earlier, he's the one who referenced the Calibanite poetry and history, and he's the one who called them Dark Angels way back then when they first saw them. So this is where this all comes from. It's cool from the perspective that it's an origin story. So really at this point, Doug, the story, well, in this book, the story of Caliban kind of leaves us. And we go out and we join the Great Crusade now. And I thought this part of the book was actually really cool because it wasn't like a lot of the heresy stories, which I still love. This one battle is like a major part of the book. This is kind of the last part of it, but it wasn't like the central thing.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You know, so it led up to this, and but it's not like the focus of the book.
I would agree. I think the way that they framed it, I feel like the fight with the lion was the climatic battle for Zahariel. Like that's his heroic tale because he did it before any augmentations. He was just a dude at 15, slaying a monster that only a demigod could. Yeah. But with this one, it feels like it's an integral battle for knowing what's going to happen with the Dark Angels, but it didn't feel like the climactic one of this story, which is the point. Yeah.
Right. So now the Legion, it's under the Lion's command, and the Dark Angels are out in space, and Nemiel and Zahariel, we said, are both Space Marines, and they're going to be present for the Legion's first planetary action, which was relieving a token force of White Scars, who were supervising a world called Sirash. And this was really cool, too, because, again, the way Scanlan wrote it, there's all these little intimations, and you know what's happening. Like, you just want him to say what it is.
Yep.
But he never says what it is. He never uses the Slanesh word. He never uses that in the whole book.
And I love it. I adore it.
I do it. I love that, right? But if you read Legion, you're going to see a lot of things that were in Legion that are here. There's a lot of stuff that's similar in terms of who these people were that were living on the planet. I picked up on that right away when they started mentioning reptilian stuff and all those kind of things, right? So the problem with this is that, you know, they're trying to get them to be compliant. The inhabitants claim that their very complex bureaucracy, which is like hundreds of thousands or millions of people on this planet, that they've caused these really long delays. And, you know, one thing checks it off and the other one has to say no. And so Zahariel is actually talking to a White Scar named Kurgus, and Kurgus is like, do not trust these people.
Yep. There's
a lot more to their delay than they are saying. Yeah, that's an understatement. Yeah. There's a lot more.
And like for context, like these Space Marine armies, they're the hammer. Like I guess they're more like the scalpel, really. Like they come in, subdue the planet, and then the guard takes over. So the fact that the White Scars are there means that like there's some very important paperwork on compliance that has not been filed out, right? They're not quite there, but at the same time, they keep saying all the right things so that no one can raise a weapon at them.
Right.
And it puts everybody in a really uneasy position, but the bureaucrats love it because politicians and artists can just sweet talk them and hear what they want to hear all day. But all the warriors who are standing around like, I don't like this. This is weird.
No.
No one's jazzed about getting invaded.
No. And you can tell the White Scars are just itching to get away from this. They're like, we're just babysitting here. That's all we're doing. We need to go and do some warrior stuff. So it was an interesting change, a totally weird and unexpected change in the story then. Yep. We meet this young woman named Priana Sorel, and she's an imager, so a picture taker. She's exactly what, who is it? The saint. I'm trying to think of the
Oh
same.
man, I know exactly who you're talking about, and I can't think of it.
Yes. Keeler was an Imager too, which was interesting. So she's an Imager with the Dark Angels. She has been, and many people have been given permission to go down to the planet and see what they're seeing. And she's talking with a Sarashi named Dusan, who's kind of her escort around the city and stuff. And they're in the capital city of Shalul. She says to him that she's heard of these really haunting, disturbing music that's played by the Sarashi. And also, there's some flowers kind of growing in the balcony they're on and stuff. And it seems really weird, like strangely affecting to her. The scent of, and I'm like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say demonettes?
Demon stank. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you say pheromones? You know, it's like, oh God, here we go. So it's weird. This city is like perfect. It's strangely perfect. It's absolutely clean. There's no crime.
Nope.
Nothing is wrong with this city except for the fact that it's absolutely perfect. That's the problem, right? And so later they're having a celebration, and Dusan kind of takes her for a walk. And the reason, by the way, listeners, that I'm telling you this story is because she ends up being very significant in a really dark way later on. This one individual does. So he's kind of moving her around the city, and she's seeing people dance. She's hearing some of this music finally. And just like the rest of Sarashi's society, the music's perfect. And all of a sudden you're thinking, danger, Will Robinson, danger.
Yeah,
danger.
exactly.
And so she's walking through the streets, guided by Dusan, and she notices he's kind of forcing her now. He's not just walking with her, and seems to be taking her to a specific place. But this music and the scent of these flowers have absolutely intoxicated her to the point where she can't even move. And then this is the ultimate creepy part. All of a sudden he says, I'm so sorry. The Melican have decreed that you are an unclean people, and you will not be allowed to pollute us. Her, will be our weapon to defeat the liar angels. There will be pain, but you serve a higher purpose. And I'm thinking back, okay, remember, listeners, in First Heretic, there was a young woman on this planet. And something happened to this young woman on the planet.
She had a bad day.
Yeah. So so we think we know where this is going now.
Yep.
Because you can say Legion, you can say First Heretic, you can say Slanesh. Yeah, we know what's going on.
Tap
here.
into some dark powers, yeah. And
oh my gosh,
we met her as a conduit here.
Yeah, exactly. and so that's why at first I think it kind of knocks you for a sideways a little bit, going, why are they talking about an Imager? What does she have to do with the story? But then you keep reading, and it makes perfect sense.
Yes. You want me to take over with the delegation
here?
Sure.
Please.
Yeah. So one thing to know about the Shorashi, one of the reasons that they're so unsettling is they all wear masks. It's like a cultural thing. Nobody shows their bare face. And so a Sarashi delegation flies up from their planet up to the Invincible Reason. So essentially like the flagship. Is that the flagship? The big one?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
For the Dark Angels, but like certainly where they would meet folks. Nemuel and his troops accompany the Lion as he moves, further into the ship. They're kind of just going on their way to meet these delegates. Zahariel, however, stays on the embarkation deck, and he's basically just doing some pre-flight activities as he gets ready to go down to the surface at some point. And he looks over and he sees Luther, and Luther is inspecting this craft that the delegation came in, and he's just looking at this thing like it's a hunk of garbage. Like, first of all, like, these people barely had space flight, and they were like, can we send a Thunderhawk to come pick you up? And they were like, no, we got our own ship. And then this, Pinto rolls up, basically.
Junk.
Yeah, yes. It's a hunk of junk. And Luther keeps looking at it like there's something wrong, but he says to Zahariel, like, go meet the rest of the party. I'll stay here with the ship and take a look at it. Zahariel goes, but he knows like something's not right. Like, there's just a weird vibe between Luther, the ship, everything. Um, the scene cuts over to the Sarashi delegate. Um, and what I love is the fact that everybody else is described as like super handsome and beautiful, like their physical form, their faces are covered. But the delegate that they sent, their representative, is this like super massive, corpulent, overweight guy. I think of like the fat vampire from the movie Blade from forever ago.
Yeah.
But like just overfluven with rolls upon rolls, and so they're all kind of like off put of like, this is your leader. This is the guy who's maintained perfection. Okay, whatever works for you people, I guess. You know, I mean, just everyone's trying to be nice. And this delegate is like, so we were recently told that you guys don't have gods. And admittedly, on the spot, Lionel Johnson is mad because he's like, this is a breakdown of our communication amongst like basic planets. How are the White Scars here for years doing, bringing these guys into the fold of the Imperium, and they don't know that we don't have gods? Like, that's like a basic thing, right? So immediately red flags are going up. This delegate then goes on to say, like, you know what? We actually do have gods, and they don't like you guys very much. Turns out, at this point, he announces that his gods are going to be ascending, and he relays messages from what they call the Melican, as you call them, right? Yeah, they're deities. This guy, the Lord Exalter, calls the Emperor a liar demon, because he teaches that there are no deities in space or whatever. I was like, oh, you're saying all the wrong things to all the wrong people, man.
I mean, you just called the Emperor a liar demon in front of Primarch. What do you think is going to happen, right?
It's not good. No. And our attention then splits back to Zahariel. He walked out, and he just couldn't get this idea of Luther looking angry and sad and inspecting the ship, which he had a weird vibe with. And so he's like, something's not right. And so he runs back to the embarkation deck, and he moves to the ship, and he sees essentially how rickety this thing is up close. He's looking like, what did Luther see that I got that weird vibe off of him from?
Right.
And as he's looking at the ship, he starts to put the mental math together. This ship is so rickety, it is a one-way vessel. In fact, there is barely anything on it that should allow it to exist in the vacuum of space. This is really a rocket pod that they just sent up. And he's like, why would you do that? And as he looks closer, it becomes clear there's a bomb on the ship. And the idea is this is a one-way destination. They were going to tick off the Dark Angels and detonate nukes from inside of the ship itself. At the same time, Luther comes running back into the area, and basically there's a very brief conversation where they're kind of getting on the same page, where Luther was like, in my shame, I admitted for a brief moment that I was super jealous of the Lion. I'm looking at all the Space Marine stuff and all these things that could have been mine, and for the briefest second I saw that bomb and I thought, I could be done with all this. And so he was tempted and he failed, and then at the last second he was like, I gotta change this. I would never live with myself if I let anything happen. Yes. And so that's when Luther comes back. So now we have this interesting situation where the most honest character, Zahariel, sees what's going on, and he has to confront the almost treachery of like his icon, Luther. At the same time, they don't have time to deal with any of that because there's a bomb right next to them. And essentially what happens is the bomb begins to detonate, but Zahariel hits like open the bay doors essentially to push the ship out. The embarkation deck is ruined. They're all burned up from the explosion, but they do survive, and they jettison it, the one-way vessel, enough to not seriously damage the flagship. But the Lion is up there just slaughtering the entire diplomatic division that came with them. Yeah. But that was like really the kickoff for their revolt. And so at this point, the Dark Angels have no idea what's going on. They are looking at this like, one, did the ship just explode accidentally? Because everyone looking at the flagship has no idea. They just saw a giant explosion, and they're like, there's riots going on the planet side, and now Space Marines have to basically like invade a planet that was already supposed to be under their thumb for forever.
Yes.
Yeah. Where do you want to pick up from there?
Well, yeah, and I think your point about Luther and this cancerous jealousy he felt.
Yep.
But the book, I don't think there's any doubt after his conversation with Zahariel how Luther feels now. I mean, he knows that the right thing to do is to follow the lion, and he's proud to follow the lion. And I think he's earnest in saying that to Zahariel.
Absolutely.
So
that's a great point, where I feel like for him personally, he never had a moment in his life other than meeting Lionel Johnson as a feral child where he could choose to get rid of him or to supersede him or do whatever he wanted to do. And now here was this opportunity, and he had to choose for himself. No, I love my friend. Like, it's not worth any of this.
He made the choice. And
exactly. Yep.
Yeah. And so, we'll talk about that whole scene again at the end. So, as you said, Johnson just murders all these.
Yeah, I mean, Triple Whopper guy is not going to stand up to a demigod.
No. And so what has happened is the Dark Angels realize there's a huge buildup of warp energy on the planet, and they focused in on where this is happening. It's out near this mining station. And Israfel, who was the brother librarian that's kind of mentoring Zahariel, he's come up with an idea that they're going to take a cyclonic weapon and they're going to turn it into a psychic bomb. And they're going to need to detonate it as close as possible, which is pretty close, to the site of where this manifestation is starting to happen.
Yes.
And when we talk about manifestation, remember the young Imager? Well, that's where she is. It kind of flips back to her real quick, and she kind of wakes up and she realizes where she is. She looks up and she sees this gelatinous form above her, and she's starting to feel, the loss. She's starting to feel the possession.
Yep. And
the Dark Angels, boom, assaulting from Stormbirds using jump packs, and they get to the mining station, and all of a sudden they're confronting these huge reptilian type creatures. And again, one more check the block for Slaanesh. And they just come boiling out of this mining station. And a lot of wounded. The Dark Angels kill them all, but they've taken a lot of casualties. Zahariel's wounded.
Yep.
And at that moment, when he killed one of the creatures, he realized that these creatures are more than Xenos.
Yes.
He realizes that there is the same taint in these creatures that he felt when he was hunting the beasts of Endriago.
Yep.
So that was
getting that context for his upbringing. Yeah.
Pretty big deal. So they clear the surface, and then the Lions, Zahariel, and Nemiel and their men descend into this hell, basically, that is underneath.
Yeah.
And man, they go down with their giant psychic weapon, and there's a battle, very close battle, fought underneath. And the Dark Angels, it turns out, have just arrived as this demonic entity was about to possess the young Imager. Zahariel actually shoots her to kind of cut off that conduit.
Yep.
The creature is still powerful enough that he and Israfel focus, and they still use it to destroy the creature and get rid of the manifestation. So they have cleansed this area of chaos. And again, beautiful. He doesn't use the word chaos once. He doesn't use the word Slaanesh once. But anybody who's read any of the Heresy books knows exactly what this is. I enjoyed not having it kind of shoved in our face, as it were. It was very neat how it you knew what it was, but didn't need to be said. So then we come to the end. And why don't you talk about the end, and we'll have some more discussion about that, because this really, I know you were really, I guess, kind of upset about this ending. You didn't like it.
So my wife, for those of you who don't know, is a writer. She's a romance author. And I explained the ending to her, and she summarized it really well. It's like an editor kicked in Mitchell's door and was like, "I do not care what you have left. I have a book to publish. Give me what's on your computer right the F now." Because the way it is written, it is the way that my wife, she'll go through and like with an outline and just casually write out what she wants to have happen, and then go back and kind of fill it out later. But it's very tell don't show.
Okay.
On the outline side of things, and that's exactly the last like chapter of this book is all tell don't show. And then Sahariel went back to the ship, and then he sat there, and then he and I was just like, oh my god. It wraps up this big fight in like I don't know, 3-4 pages, I feel like. And then essentially what happens is a couple hours after the big battle on the planet, we're back on the Invincible Reason, and Lionel Johnson, he is preparing to leave the system. Now that the planet has been defeated, they can make it compliant. And so, I mean, what's left of it, I guess. I don't know how big the bomb was in terms of its scope, but and essentially he sends a large detachment of his legion back to Caliban aboard the ship, the Wrath of Caliban. And their job is essentially go home and get more recruits. And he's the line that he gives his legion is, now that we've seen how dangerous the galaxy is, we need a lot more recruits from Caliban. And it didn't sit right, because the people he sent back were Luther, Sahariel, and a bunch of others who were there in that fight. The people who had experienced chaos the most, he sent back home. Mm-hmm. And then he takes the rest and joins the Great Crusade, which we know from the rest of the books. And that's essentially the end of the story, is just Zahariel going back to Caliban with Luther. Yeah. And I didn't care for it because, one, that doesn't mean anything if you don't know what's coming on Caliban, right?
Yes.
Like, if you don't know that those are going to be labeled as the bad guys, and you spent the entire book following the quintessential good guy, you don't understand the context of that, and it just, I don't know, man. It just fell so flat. It was the wettest fart in literary. Yep. I should in the Black Library. I don't want to say too much. That's mean, but like, oh no, it just felt rushed, and it didn't feel like the author wanted to end the book that way. It felt like someone was like, "Give me the book, end it here on the way back to Caliban." You're like, mm-hmm. But none of it was wrapped up.
Right. Yeah.
What are your thoughts? That was my rant.
I had the same feeling, and it just felt so sour and so vindictive, and it was almost, I use the word hateful, the way Johnson did what he did. Like, in his whole rationale, hey, we got to increase the flow of Astartes to the battlefront. Not processing recruits quickly enough. You guys, as experienced Astartes, need to go back and fix this. And I'm going, what? Like, there are guys now on the planet recruiting.
Yeah,
they're recruiting, and you could send one guy back. You don't have to send half your legion. You can send one guy back or two, and they could make things better. Okay, yes. Send the message back. The Lion's not happy, and everybody be like, "Oh, we got to do better," and they would, because they're Space Marines. I just felt so badly for Zahariel and Luther in the way this ended. I mean, there's no doubt how this story is going to proceed now. You just know there isn't.
Well, and tell me if I missed something, because I might have. I listened to these things in audiobook form and whatever.
Sure.
But it felt, the ending of the story felt like it would make sense if Luther and Zahariel came to the Lion and said, "We had moments of doubt," or at least Luther did. Mm-hmm. And I need to ask your forgiveness for that, or something like that, because it seems like he's shaming them without any reason as to why.
Right.
And that's felt from the characters, but also me as a reader. I'm like, okay, but why did that happen?
Well, there's a couple of references to uh, the lion and Luther sitting down after all this happened,
Okay.
like having a talk of some kind. But I'm not, I don't like that. I think that's so wrong. The reason is that Zahariel and Luther almost died getting rid of that bomb shuttle. Like they were horribly burnt from all the heat and the engines and the
Yep.
plasma and everything else. They could have just said, well, screw this,
Yeah. Oh no. And then Israfel was like, if this bomb was not psychic in nature, you wouldn't be here to Zahariel, right? Because he's too injured, but he's a
Right.
psyker. They need him for the thing,
Yeah.
and so it's like,
Yeah, I
okay,
mean, they did what any good son of the Primarch would do.
yep,
They literally thought they were going to sacrifice their lives to save their Primarch, and he does this.
yeah.
Jerk.
And then the book just fades to black, and you're like,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, yeah. So it was disappointing in that way. I agree. And for me, I think it depends on which side you pick eventually. Depending on how the story goes, but you can obviously see how and why Luther and Zahariel are bitter, in their way,
yes.
and disappointed and angry and hurt. You can understand that.
Well,
And
yeah, I think they set up an immense amount of great drama and storytelling. I just I feel like if they had another go at that last chapter, the book would be amazing. It could be not amazing, but great. Just because, like, even if it had ended on, we were sent back to Caliban, and little did I know I would go from being a hero to a traitor of the Imperium or something. Like, it just really, truly was like, yeah. And then we got sent home, and I'm bummed about it.
sure,
Okay.
yeah. It's just, and from my part, when the next book in this part of the story, the Heresy story, is called Fallen Angels,
Mm-hmm.
which, so we're going to tell you that, so you should kind of be able to figure out some of what's going to be happening here. And man, I have to empathize with Luther and Zahariel and the guys who were sent back. I can't not or sympathize with them in it.
Yeah, and I want to say,
Because-
like, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, as much as I didn't like the ending reeks to me of an editor, being like, "We need this done now,"
Sure.
because the author really delivered, I think, in a lot of the dialogue. It's a good book. I don't know. It just needed a tweak here and there.
Yeah, agreed. And it was I thought it was a good origin story for this Legion.
Yeah, I mean, no, the Dark Angels aren't my thing, but if you're into the Knightly Orders, I think it's a fantastic. Like, how did they get this precedent set up? Yeah,
Mhm.
I think it's real cool. I could definitely see someone who's super into Dark Angels being like, "Oh crap, that's how Cypher fits into things. That's so cool!" Like, I bet it's awesome to see him go from wise counsel to Zorro, basically, of Chaos armies.
Sure. And there's
it's
even
cool.
a mention of like the Raven Wing. Now
Yes,
they were riding horses in this story, but there's reference to it. And if you're a Dark Angels fan, you're going, "Oh my gosh, there was a real Raven Wing in the story." Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
It's something they've always had.
And so I don't ever want to give the impression that I don't like saying it's a bad book, right? I don't typically like those kinds of reviews or assessments. What I will say, though, is this book tried to tell two stories, and it nailed one, which is the story of the first half of what's going to happen with the Dark Angels to understand their division. I think he nailed it in terms of the internal strife, the personal level, how the Knightly Orders and their origins affect the value systems. What he didn't land, I think, was creating the singular, succinct story of this book and having it end in a satisfying way. And so that was just that, you created one half of a story and you nailed that half, but you didn't link it and make it its own. I don't know.
Yes, agreed. I agree with you.
Our next book obviously is going to be Fallen Angels. We gotta finish this up.
Yes, yes, we do.
And I am very excited too. This one is by a different author, Mike Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very excited because I don't know. I sound real negative there, but I liked their perspective and the things that they wrestled with the nature of religion and how that plays out on things, and how some of their understanding of language, when the Dark Angels talk about, or the Legion that will be known as Dark Angels talks about their ranks and stuff like that. It pings enough to kind of lull a lot of the knights in, but there's some of them who are like, nah, man, that's almost like co-opting. I don't like this.
Sure.
And it's interesting to see, like, those are the nuanced kind of internal debates that every Legion should hopefully have a book about. What are your people like? What do they think about, or they struggle with? Or I love that kind of stuff.
I agree.
I'm excited to see that play out in the next book too. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the next book, it's interesting because it's one of those kind of novels where you have two main stories going on.
Interesting. Okay.
And that's really kind of neat, as opposed to what we had here, which was Caliban for most of the story. So yeah, very cool.
Mm-hmm.
All right, man. Well, thanks. That was excellent. It was great to go back and listen to that book after so long.
Yep.
And enjoy it.
I will say, like, before reading this is my first listen or read through, and I've heard people say, "Oh man, that book, that just was so disappointing," and I've heard negative things about it. And I will say it was refreshing in that I think it is very competently written. It just wasn't satisfyingly ended.
Right.
And so if you like the Dark Angels, it's not a waste of your money. It's a really cool book. And I'm sure, like I said at the top of the video, it improves the more you already know. So, like, if you start with this series and make your way through it, I'm sure by the end you will retroactively go back and be like, "Ah, that was cool." Like, so that caveat's important. That's why I put it at the top.
Sure. Yeah.
So, anything else you want to say to the nice people?
I think that's it, my friend.
Okay. Well, hey, thank you all so much for hanging out with us and listening to Tales of Knights and Chivalry in our Space Marines book. We got our first Space Marine 2/3 of the way through, so late start. Kind of like In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins. I dig it. And anyway, go ahead and let us know after the Fallen Angels what book series you would like us, or Legion you would like us to follow. And you can give us comments on my Discord at 2+ Stuff, and also here on the YouTube video for this. So thank you all so much. And until next time, goodbye, friends. Goodbye, Dan. I'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Yep.
Until then, may the Emperor protect.